Hi everyone! In today's video I'm going to show you how you can create your own wedding style hair pieces. Lately I've been thinking a lot about Christmas and in particular how much handmade presents mean to me. They tend to be planned out with time spent on their construction and assembly, and because of that I can't help but feel that they really do come from a place of love. As such, I wanted to show you guys how to build a simple series of hair accessories that you can easily recreate, and then perhaps give away to your favorite female relatives and friends. I'm also going to show you a few different ways that they can be styled into the hair itself. For this project, you will obviously need beads. I'm using a series of light yellow ones, translucent pink teardrop style ones, these red leaf-shaped beads, and of course small glass pearls. I also have a measuring tape on hand and 28 gauge craft wire. This gauge especially is perfect because it's thin, pliable, and sturdy, but will still leave you with a delicate looking finished piece. I've also got several spools of ribbon, although this material is optional depending on which design you decide to do, and in terms of tools I have a chain nose pliers, wire cutters, nylon jaw pliers, and round nose pliers. Take one is the ribbon headband, and I began by measuring my head across from ear to ear. That space was 13 inches. This is actually the only real measurement that I'm going to make because when it comes to the wire itself you can never really tell how much you'll need to unspool initially, but I'll show you what I mean in a moment. You can see that I've started by unwinding a lot of material, probably somewhere between 3 and 4 feet. It's then folded in half evenly and gets snipped off the spool. I'll need a place to secure my ribbon eventually, so I'm going to build an eye to lace it through at the end. To do this, I'm starting at the point where the wire was folded in half whilst using the nylon jaw pliers to really get those two ends to lay flush against each other. Beginning about 3 inches down from this freshly pressed point, I'm taking my round nose pliers and bending it against the longer sides of the wire. Since this is a 28 gauge, which is obviously relatively thin, I felt like it might be a good idea to reinforce the loop by winding the small end around the cylinder of my tool a second time. As you can hopefully see, I pressed it all together with my chain nose pliers so that it might look a little more polished, and then it was just a matter of wrapping the smaller half of wire around the longer pieces at the base of my looped eye. Now I have a loop on one end with 2 even lengths of wire extending down, which I've pulled away from each other. I've put my first pearl onto one of them, and it's my hope that you can see that I'm holding it about a ½ inch away from the loop. I'm sort of folding it in on itself with the pearl in the middle of this bend. And then with my fingers I twisted those two parts of the wire together. I'm going to repeat this on the other long end of wire too. I laced the pearl on, made sure I had about a ½ inch from the base, folded the wire onto itself with the bead in the middle of the bend, and then with my fingers I twisted the two pieces together below it. Since I now have a pearl on both ends of the wire, I'm going to twist the 2 long pieces together a few times so that it'll eventually appear as though it's one piece of wire with beading sprouting off on either side. And that's basically the gist of the entire process. The wire is folded in half, the eye loop is formed as per the steps I just demonstrated, and then it's just lacing the beads on in any pattern you choose. The wire is folded in on itself and then twisted together under the bead. In between each bead, the long halves are twisted around each other. It does take a minute or so to get the hang of it, but once you've got it, it's really no bother. 28 gauge is, as I said before, pliable enough that you can use your fingers for most, if not all of it. And even if you've not experimented with wire work before, this is a pretty doable project since it's relatively forgiving. The most important materials are the beads themselves because if you find pretty ones, no one will notice if a twist here or there isn't super fantastic. When I got as far down as I could on my 2 ends of wire, I put the piece against my measuring tape and it turned up about 4 inches too short. Going back to what I said earlier, this is definitely something that can happen. Even if you started with a 5-foot piece of wire, all the wrapping, folding, and twisting takes up a lot of length, sometimes more than you anticipate. No worries though, because you just start the process over again by building another piece that's long enough to make up the difference. So I cut my wire, folded it in half, made my ribbon eye, and then wefted on all the beads. Now to attach them to each other, I twisted whatever remained of the 2 wires together. I like to have at least an inch there, and I'll usually clip off the excess. Once they're both sealed off and ready, I'll cut about 5 inches or so from the spool and use that piece to tie the 2 together. You kind of line them up against each other as evenly as you can before winding the small loose piece around the 2 halves until they're securely joined. If there's any wire left over, you can cut that off and use the pliers to flatten those ends against the center. And it's in that way that you get a finished bead weft, one that's as long as your original desired length. To save time, I've fast forwarded and created a second line, but this time with the red leaf shaped and yellow beads. I usually like to have at least 2 rows like this, but of course you can make 3 or more depending on how you want the finished accessory to appear. I settled on a maroon colored ribbon, and I cut 2 pieces for either end, and then I laid the 2 bead wefts on top of each other, lining the centers up as closely as I could. At that point, I laced the ribbon through the eyes on both sides. Just like when I attached the 2 separate ends to make the complete 13-inch long line, I cut a new piece of wire and I used it to wrap and bind the centers together, thus creating one solid piece. The easiest and most satisfying part of the project, at least in my opinion, is the last step. This is when you can push the beaded branches upward so that they blend together. Once again, the wire being the gauge that it is, it allows the crafter to move it around easily, so you can shift and adjust anything you feel is out of place or needs to be repositioned. So now that it's finished, I wanted to demonstrate a really simple way to incorporate this into the hair. I have a center parting and I've used a tapered wand to put a light bend into my strands. I've also separated hair from either side of my face away with some style clips. All I've done is put the headband on and tied it into a bow at the back. With a comb, I smoothed out those 2 sections of hair that I'd left out along my face, and I used one of those topsy-tail tools to lace the hair around the ribbons once or twice on either side. As I said, pretty simple, no braiding involved, but somehow it looks just a smidge dressier because of the accessory itself. In the second go around, I'll show you how I applied this beading technique to a hair comb, and in this version there's no eye loop because there's no ribbon. So all I did was cut the piece of wire, fold it evenly in half, and my first bead was strung on and sat right in the bend. I then twisted the 2 pieces together right below it, and that's sort of how I addressed starting this project without that loop. From there, I followed the same steps as before by stringing a bead on, folding the wire onto itself, and twisting. I wanted a lot of color for this one, so I made 6 individual bead wefts, all around 4 inches or so in varying patterns. And like last time, I used smaller pieces of wire to attach them to the comb by wrapping it around the center of the weft and through the teeth of the accessory. Because there were more pieces involved this time, it actually took a little longer than it did to bind the 2 pieces from the headband demo. I think part of it too was that I needed to be a bit more aware of how I situated them on as well. Obviously my goal was for the beading to be even to the comb on either side. Also, if you like the beads I'm using, check out the underbar. I have some of the Etsy stores that I purchased them from linked below. For the style aspect, I chose to do something pretty basic and simple. I made an off-centered part and sectioned out hair from either side of my head with clips. I also lightly backcombed my crown. Beginning in the back and on the right, I lifted up a small bit of hair, split it in 3, and started a sideways Dutch braid. As always, I'll link my Braidtionary video if you need a reference. Just know that you don't have to follow me here because there are dozens of braid-free upstyles that could work with a comb. I just wanted to provide a little bit of hair context with my accessory demo, and this is what came out of my fingers that day. Once the braid was complete, I tied it off with an elastic and folded the end back and forth across my nape, tucking the tail under and securing the bun with some pins. Starting on the small side of the part, I divided the hair into 2 and rope twisted to the ends. I wanted this to look as soft as possible, so I did go back in to pancake the loops a bit before tying it off and draping it back across the braided bun. On the heavier side of the part, I decided it might be appropriate to make vintage-style waves, and to do this I used my curling wand. Instead of wrapping the hair over and around, I laid the tool over the hair and pulled the strands under and then over. I've done this a few times for other hair video ideas, and I really like the effect it creates. Since there's way more hair on this side of my head, I split it into 2, and just like on the other side, I built rope twists that I pancaked and then draped across the braided bun. And because I have those little baby hairs that poke out around my face and neck, I decided to curl them with a thinner barreled wand. Just seemed easier than fighting against them with pins. The comb simply rests in the center of the up style, with the braids anchoring it in. And with that, take 2 is finished. Take 3 is an all the way around the head crown. I built 2 rows of bead wefts that measured 23 inches long when they were complete. And I did this the same way as the others, that is, in pieces which I sewed together with wire. For the hair, I made a center parting at the top of my head and then split it into 2 and pushed both halves over either shoulder. Next, I placed the crown onto my head and began on the right side with a French rope twist, down into a rope braid. I actually have a couple of videos already posted that are very similar to this style, and I'll have them linked below if you'd like to see different variants of this sort of pattern. In some ways, this is just another take on a rope twist crown braid. Of course, this needs to be repeated on the other side of the head as well. And since the beads reminded me of olive leaves, I wanted this to feel Grecian, and for me, rope twists always help me to achieve that sentiment. Once the braids are complete, I simply pin them back and forth across my neck to form a simple bun. There's really nothing to this, and I feel like even braiding beginners can manage it. And with that, take 3 is complete. Take 4 is also an all the way around crown, and the beads here are all light colored glass and freshwater pearls. I also attached a few Venetian beads to one side for some extra detailing. And since I chose materials that I already felt were ultra feminine, I decided to wave my hair and simply put the crown on and leave it down. Take 5 is also a circular piece, but its circumference is way smaller than the previous 2. With this, I was shooting for more of a halo than a crown, and when it came to the styling, I chose to recreate one of my own hair ideas from a video that I uploaded a couple of years ago called the Tiara crown braid. It was inspired by an extra from Game of Thrones, and I'll have that linked below. But to give a brief explanation, I made a center parting and then used the comb to separate 2 panels of hair on either side of my head, and for now I'm clipping the rest back. I brushed everything over to the left side, hairsprayed the frizzies, and began to make a sideways Dutch lace braid. This technique involves folding the strands under one another, and the additional hair is brought in from along the hairline into the top strand only. In my original video, I did the French lace braid instead, but I actually think that this stands out more significantly. Once the front half was braided, I pulled out the clip and continued the Dutch lace pattern around the back. It's important to keep your hands high up on your head since the braid will naturally follow your finger placement, and you may need to pay special attention to small straggler hairs sticking out or falling down on the neck. When everything was braided in, I carried the pattern down to the ends, tied it off with an elastic, and then wrapped the tail around my head to complete the crown braid. The hair jewelry itself isn't quite the same width as my up style, but it was close enough. And all I did was lay it on top whilst using a few open pins to anchor it into place. And with that, take 5 was complete. Anyway, I've reached the end of my video today. I hope you guys liked some of the ideas I presented in it. Would love to hear what you think, so definitely leave me comments down below. And until next time, enjoy your holiday festivities, have fun, and keep braiding. Bye!